what's up, everyone? Welcome to the ninth episode of The Third Divide. My guest today is Ellen Rosenberger. So, Ellen, welcome. And as always, let's just start off by asking which countries did you spend most of your childhood in? Like elementary and high school kind of thing.
I lived in Bolivia in South America from the time I was 4 years old until I graduated high school. So I was 17.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So, you went from Texas to Bolivia?
Yeah. Yep. I was four, so I didn't really know much different. Really don't have very many memories from earlier than that. So all of my growing up years, memories are from living in South America.
Mm-hmm. So you didn't really think much of it at all when it first happened.
Oh, not at all. I mean, I was young, barely four. I had a younger sister who's two, and my brother was born there, and it was just, what was normal. It's just what we did. Yeah.
Um, and so, even though you were young, did you notice a sensible difference about the place you lived in or the places you've lived in?
I mean, I am sure now that I'm grown and have kids of my own, I've noticed even when, so I've lived overseas as an adult as well and have moved my family to and from Latin America a number of times. And I have noticed in my own kids, as young as they were when we moved from the US to Nicaragua and then from Nicaragua back to the US, there were varying ages of they could have been as young as 3 or 4, and I could tell they knew, this is different. And so even though I don't have any recollection, I'm sure the changes did affect me. But kids are so resilient, and they are so adaptive and are great learners, and have a sense of adventure and fun about them, right? So that obviously that transition is not a huge didn't make a huge impact in my mind at the time because I was very young.
So I'm sure you went back to visit the States a few times when you were living in Bolivia, correct?
Yeah, we would go back about every 3 or 4 years for a year furlough, and we'd live in Texas and be near my mom's family and visit churches and that kind of thing.
Hmm. And did you experience any form of reverse culture shock when that happened? Because you lived most of your life in Bolivia.
Yeah, of course. Especially in those years. I remember we lived for a year when I was in second grade. That wasn't too bad. I think I adapted really well. But then we were in the US from middle of seventh grade to all of eighth grade. And so, I mean, middle school years are crazy. So
Mhm.
it was very difficult, I'd say. Especially because I didn't know what to expect. I was coming back to sort of a familiar, area, saw my relatives, lived in the same house we lived in when I was in second grade, but completely different culture. I didn't know a lot of the words that kids were saying, or definitely didn't have any kind of sense of style that they did. I didn't, I looked like them as far as like my skin color or whatever, but um, I had no clue what was going on in the culture around me. Yeah.
So you were able to speak Spanish better than you spoke English?
Not necessarily. I would say both. I was fluent in both. It was helpful that I learned it so early on. I went to an English speaking school, but definitely spoke Spanish at our church and with people in the community and um, that kind of thing. Yeah.
Hmm. So how did so when you went back to the States for a year in second grade and also in middle school, how what helped you adapt to all the new changes?
Yeah. I mean, I'd say when we went back and see the second grade doesn't, I don't have very many memories of it. I think I did all right. So I was younger, but in middle school, probably what helped me was just kind of developing a thicker skin, if that makes sense. Cause I just realized like there's not anyone that's going to get me because I don't feel like I fit in here. And people either are confused about, where I came from, what, who I am, and they didn't really care to learn about it, right? And so I had to really just kind of decide, okay, I'm here now. I've got to kind of, I didn't try to blend in necessarily, but I did try to like learn, okay, what, what is going on around me. And I had to kind of um, just like absorb some of those like difficulties. Like I was told, like, go back where you came from, like different things. And I had to deal with it. I couldn't. I had to stay there. And so I had to figure it out. I ended up, this is another thing that helped me. I ended up making friends with other students that were different. So, like, two friends that come to mind, I in middle school made, they were Muslim. They had coverings, not necessarily outcasts, but different. Another a black student, right? So like different other people that I could just relate to, like we're different, So I think that was helpful just to strike up friendships like that.
Yeah. And so because of everything that happened when you were in middle school, did you feel relieved or a little sad to go back to Bolivia? You're like you had to leave all your friends behind, that sort of thing.
Probably mostly relieved to get back to where I had known. Excited, right, to be back in my home. I knew that being in the States was just temporary for that middle school year and a half or whatever. Um, yeah, I'm sure it was a little sad to say goodbye to some of these new friends, but as you know, like TCKs can kind of develop this ability to just roll with like what's going on. So, okay, now we're going back and I've got to say goodbyes again. I'm kind of used to that, right?
Hmm. Like TCKs can like they have that thrill of the fresh start.
Yeah, for sure. And then I think just the experience isn't necessarily so traumatizing every time as far as goodbyes, depending on the situation. But I think they can kind of become seasoned um, with that and knowing, this is just part of our life.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So so at the time you considered Bolivia more of your home than the US.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. The US was like where we go to visit family and churches and, eat McDonald's and get new clothes or whatever. But it was always like visiting, right? Just temporary.
Yeah. So how did because now you live in the States, right?
Yeah, we've been back now about 5 years. But previously we'd lived in Nicaragua for about 12 years, my husband and I. And then our first two kids were born there.
Hmm. So now that you've lived in Bolivia, the States, and also Nicaragua, how did all of these experiences change your worldview?
Oh man, so many different ways. I'd say I probably didn't realize it as much as a kid, but when I came back to the States, after graduating from high school and going on to college, um, probably that's when I realized like, wow, I have lived a very different life and I don't know how my worldview fits in here. I went to college in Chicago, right in the heart of the city. And so it's quite a different environment than I was used to. And like I remember one day I just I like went to the top of my dorm and just wanted to shout to the city, like everyone just shut down and like shut all the businesses down. Let's go take a siesta. Like that's what I was used to, like in the middle of the day, like all businesses are closed for like 2 hours. And it just was a totally different world. So yeah, and then I think as an adult, I came to appreciate a lot more that I had that different worldview, but in a different way. Like I think I was kind of prideful about it, as a young adult, college student or whatever. Like I'm different. I know more. Like I have a more open mind about the world and people than someone that grew up in the same town like all their life. Um, but I think since then I've hopefully God has helped me to um, gain more of a compassion and understanding, and not kind of leading with that pride that I'm better than other people. It's just we all have different experiences.
Hmm.
Yeah.
So during your college years in Chicago, when people would ask you where you're from, or I don't know, similar questions, did you ever feel like it was hard to explain life to them?
Oh, for sure. I always just had to figure out quickly, like, do I give them the real answer, the long answer, or like, depending on like, what I would think, I would always gauge their interest level or like, how they might respond. Because I didn't want to like give that information out to anybody and then just kind of like be looked at weird, or like even like the sentiment of like, oh, poor soul or whatever. So yeah, it was always kind of like I would give the answer depending on who was asking it.
Yeah. But did you ever, so because of that, did you have a go-to answer? Like if,
Yeah, I'd lean towards like I'm from Texas because that's where when I graduated from high school, my family actually moved away from Bolivia, which was also interesting because I had other TCAK friends or international student friends that their families were still overseas and they were there, but I had my family in Texas, so I would go there on Christmas breaks and summer breaks. So
hmm. So, like, when did you re like being a TCK isn't really a common term, right?
yeah,
So, when did you realize you were a TCK?
I'd say probably like in middle school or high school, it started becoming more talked about, at least in the circles we were in, right? So I applaud my parents. They did a great job with um, giving us resources. Like when we moved away from Bolivia, they got me and my sister into like a camp for TCKs, to help them adjust back to the United States, and they like helped you with
Really?
practical things like bank account and applying for jobs, just different things, but they, surrounded you. You were all there together with people that can understand you. And so, yeah, I think it was probably middle school, high school time that I did hear the term and was aware of it, and understanding that I was different.
So you feel like the camp was your greatest help when you came back?
It probably was. It gave me a lot of tools and a lot of permission to grieve my former home. I think a lot of TCKs tend to or can tend to just stuff it down, stuff it in, don't talk about it, don't um
Out of sight, out of
think
mind?
about it. Yeah, but it really gave me permission to grieve my loss of my home, and to be able to say, this is hard, rather than just kind of glossing it over and like we got to move on. Because I think, I think there's so many people that even if you haven't been on, haven't lived overseas in 20 years, I think it's such a formative time in your life. Those roots are still there, right? And I don't, if you don't work through that and process that change, it's not going to go away.
I find that, still knowing people that still live in your former home kind of helps because you have a reason to go visit and like a good reason to go visit, right? Was that the case
Yeah,
for you?
absolutely. I think you're right. I that is definitely true. I think that was the difference for me when I left Bolivia. My family did too. So we still knew people there, and I still know some people there now. Let's see, 21 years after I moved away. Um, but I believe that's true. If there's people, family, or close friends, people that you can go back and visit or stay in touch with, that's really key.
Hmm. So, are you relieved now that your life has more stability?
That's a interesting question. I don't know. I mean, I think so. I think that's the right answer. But reflecting back, I'm like, but the adventure and the experiences, I wouldn't trade them for anything, right? But I
Mhm.
think it is different, right? As a child going along with what your family's doing, you don't have those choices. And then being able to make them as an adult is definitely a different scenario. Um, so I guess, I'd say yes, that I do, appreciate the stability we have in our life now, but at the same time, I don't know if this is true of other TCKs. I kind of have an inkling that it might be that we will maybe sometime, or maybe always have this sort of underground fear that like we'll get grounded or settled someplace
Oh yeah.
long term and not and kind of get stuck there and and not give up those uh, opportunities for travel or being overseas again. So it's kind of weird the answer I'm giving you, but it's sort of a double-sided coin, right? I've longed all my life for that stability. I've been jealous of people that can go back to their childhood homes and like show their kids like this is where I grew up, or like always going back to the same place. But at the same time, I do I'm fearful of that time where it's like I'm glued somewhere and I'm not like free to and experience life and adventures overseas.
Yeah. And you're actually not the first TCK to tell me that. I mean, I've had a few interviews where uh people said the same thing. They're afraid of being grounded. It's like
Mm-hmm.
TCKs have this inkling to just travel, right?
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
especially during a pandemic. So
Oh, wow. Yeah. But at the same time, I think too, still like that longing for belonging, right? I think that's ingrained in all of us to have a place where we belong.
yeah. So right now, it's been a while since you've lived in Bolivia, right?
Yeah.
And also Nicaragua.
Yeah, it's been about 5 years since we've lived in Nicaragua and yeah, 21 years since I lived in Bolivia.
All right. So right now, where would you say is the place that you feel most comfortable in, or which place would you feel more like a foreigner in?
Comparing Bolivia or Nicaragua or
Every single place you've lived in.
oh, every single place I lived in. Wow. Yeah, I'd have to answer where I am now. And it's not because anything about the place that I'm at, because hilariously enough, I'm in a tiny town with less than 2,000 people in the middle of cornfields. I honestly would have never dreamed in the whole world I would be living here, living in a small town. Really, I mean, God clearly led my family here 2 years ago. Um, but the reason I say here is because I feel like God has blessed me with the assurance and the peace that this is home now. 2 years ago, I would have said home is Colorado. We lived in Colorado for 3 years, coming off the mission field right away from Nicaragua. We went straight to Colorado, and that was home then. So, you know, I believe, there's homes for different seasons. And that's, I think, where I've landed now is, God gives me that adaptability and that ability to just be be where I'm at. That's where home is.
Definitely, definitely.
Yeah.
And my final question for you today is, what are the main benefits and challenges you think you've gained from, or like you faced by being a TCK?
Those are great questions. I think benefits, um, above and beyond just being able to experience a different culture, different way of life, that has breeded um, just an ability to look at other people's situations or life, from their perspective as much as possible, and just not getting so limited in my scope, right, of one place only, right? And I think flexibility, the ability to just roll with the punches, adapt. Also, I think skills in making friends. You have to do that to survive, and there's plenty of experience doing that throughout a TCK's life. So I'd say those are like some of the biggest benefits. Challenges, definitely, we talked about it, like that longing for a place, an ability to be able to say, this is, just a simple answer to the question, where are you from? And not being a weirdo, right? And just being normal like the next person. And I'd say, yeah, like I mentioned before, a challenge could be too, like struggling with pride and feeling like you're better than other people because you've had this experience, and better, and you're wiser or more seasoned as a person. So
All right. Well, Ellen, thank you so much for coming on today.
yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was a pleasure.